Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, Objectively Dan, and this is the show where we talk about what people believe and why every single week, live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time. This month is a bit different from some other months. If you guys are watching live, you can already see we got some different graphics here. This is a little experiment that we're trying here. So, a little backstory on this. A couple weeks ago on Twitter, I said a thing saying, I wanted more Christians on the show for Truth Wanted. I have said this from the very beginning. Since starting the show, I've wanted to get more people besides just atheists on to start a conversation, to see what it'd be like to do a call-in show together. And I got a lot of responses from this. And so from that responses, we got some people that we want to try to feature on this month to see how it goes. And I didn't mean to dress like this today. I had a work thing today, and like today's Good Friday, and I feel like I'm sitting in like a church pew right now. And the green screen's not working, but if we did, I'd be in like a church pew here. But this is Theist Month. This is something a little bit different for Truth Wanted. So my special guest today is Keith Giles. Keith, welcome to Truth Wanted.
Oh, Dan, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited. And, everything's better with more Christians, right?
Oh, man. Way to start a fire already. Already the pushback is real. But no, Keith is a Christian author and a podcaster as well. And you do a bunch of cool stuff, Keith. But we were just talking a bit before the show, having a conversation about kind of talking about my story a little bit too, and just like the concept of like Christian deconstruction. And your work revolves a lot around the Christian deconstruction kind of movement. And I was hoping you could give kind of an explanation of what that is and what that really means to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So, a lot of what I've been doing for the last, probably for at least the last 5 or 6 years has been focused on this deconstruction of faith. And of course, it started with my own deconstruction, probably about 10 years ago. And deconstruction just means, if you're a Christian, you're raised in the church like I was since I was about 9 years old. Even later on became licensed and ordained as a pastor and served on staff at churches and things like that. You see how the sausage gets made. You become aware of some things that the average pew sitter isn't aware of. And you just start having questions. And once you start pulling that thread, once you start learning some things that you didn't know before, and you see that, oh, wow, these things that I've been told my whole life about the Bible or about different doctrines, they don't really line up. This isn't actually the case. You start doubting and questioning those parts of your faith. And this is what the deconstruction process is like. And it's a very painful process for many, many people because you end up losing relationships, probably your closest relationships. Family members now don't want to have you over to the house anymore for birthday parties because you don't believe what they believe anymore. You lose fellowship and friendship, from in the church and things like that. The relationships you built up over years being a part of the church. And so it's very emotionally painful, very sort of a lot of anxiety associated with this idea of like, I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know what's true anymore. And you feel very isolated because most people going through this deconstruction do it alone. You normally, when you're going through it, when I talk to people about it, their feeling is that, I don't know anybody in my zip code who thinks this way or feels this way. And all my family and friends think I'm crazy or I've lost my faith or there's just something wrong with me. And so they're scrambling. They kind of need some help. And that's kind of what our podcast has been doing over the last 3 years or so, the Heretic Happy Hour. So I co-host that with 3 other people. And we don't even all agree with each other on things. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the beauty of the deconstruction movement. So we host this podcast. There's 4 co-hosts, and we don't even agree on everything. And yet what we get to model every episode is what it looks like to disagree with people and still love them and respect them. We don't argue. We don't name call. We don't shout. We actually do a lot of laughing. We drop a lot of F-bombs. And we listen. We listen to each other. And we even invite other people to come on as our guests. We call them the Heretics of the Week. And we listen to their story. We listen to their perspective. And it's actually been really wonderful. We have gotten so much great feedback from people who've said that this podcast has really helped them go through this deconstruction process and figure out what they believe and what they don't believe. And our posture is sort of like, it doesn't, it's up to you. Like really, every individual person is in charge of what that looks like and where they land. We're not trying to steer anybody in a certain direction. We're just trying to talk to people, listen to people, provide some resources if we can, and help them feel not so alone through this process.
Yeah. So like, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this, because my own personal journey was heavily involved. I mean, it was a deconstructive process. You know, it was because of the deconstruction movement of Christianity that I am where I am today, which is an atheist. But like, before I was an atheist, it was, I identified as a more kind of progressive Christian. I was like a deconstructed Christian. And I got to that point because people were starting to disagree with like this mainstream idea of what Christianity was like in American culture and stuff, right? And like, I think people, you know, I was always taught to be skeptical and to be afraid of people who didn't like toe the party line for this particular kind of Christianity. And I think I see that now in reflection, because when you deconstruct, like, you inherently come to disagreements, whether that's with yourself or with people around you. And that can cause confusion, that can cause like a change in hierarchy, right? Because somehow the people that you were taught to respect and value above all else suddenly don't have all the answers and don't have that control over your life anymore. And like, and the word of authority of scripture and stuff also takes like a different role in your life as well. Like, I don't think, you know, I mean, I don't know how you view the Bible, but I don't know if you would view it as the be all end all to everything, right? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's actually the second book I wrote. I wrote this now the fifth book or sixth book in the series. I got to keep track. Just came out last week. And so the second book, it's called Jesus Unbound, Liberating the Word of God from the Bible. And so again, as someone who was a Christian, raised in the church, licensed and ordained, all that stuff, I started noticing how a lot of Christians tended to treat the Bible almost as if it was the third person of the Trinity, like Father, Son, and Holy Bible. You know what I mean? And the Bible will change your life. And if we could just get the Bible back in schools, and if you just read the Bible, or even the question like, is it biblical? That's not biblical. This is biblical. And so that's why I wrote that book, is about another way to approach Scripture that I think makes more sense, rather than this flat Bible perspective, which is the only option I was ever given growing up. This idea that every book in the Bible, every verse in the Bible has equal weight and authority as any other, as if basically, it says, the book says Bible, author, God, it dropped out of heaven, wrapped in Corinthian leather. And rather than saying, well, no, look, and I get in trouble when I say this with a lot of Christians, but this is what I want us to understand. God didn't write the Bible. People did. And we need to, number one, understand that people wrote the Bible. God didn't write anything. And so you have a various different, a variety of different perspectives of people over centuries, right? A few thousand years of different people saying, I think God is like this. And well, my experience of God was that. And, in the Old Testament scriptures, Jewish people actually embrace that. That's what they find refreshing about their text, is that it is a variety. The joke, like if you get three Jewish rabbis in a room, you have four opinions. And but it's a joke, but it's because it's true. They value other perspectives so much, they'll give you their perspective and then they'll make up one. Like they're comfortable with there being a variety of perspectives and voices, even if some of them contradict. They're not concerned about that. Now, Christians, we're not like that. We want it to be, it's all about it's 100% true, inerrant, infallible, and all that stuff. And I just think that's I wrote a whole book on that. And one of the things I try to do is help Christians kind of back off a little bit from the ledge. Understand, take the Bible for what it is, understand what it is and what it isn't. There are mistakes, there are errors, there were changes made to your Bible. I'm sorry to say, your English translations. You and I were talking before we went live that I shared a blog post I wrote about the fact that, hey, Christians, I'm sorry, but there's pseudepigrapha. That means fake letters from Paul and Peter in your New Testament right now. We know for a fact Paul didn't write a couple of these letters, and Peter, no way Peter wrote those letters.
This isn't just like you speaking off the cuff. This is the result of research from academics for decades that have come to the determination of studying this stuff. So like I talk about this too, and when I say it every time, it sounds like a crank thing to kind of say if you don't know, there's books about this, like, you know what I mean? Like, because people have all kinds of weird ideas about it for some of the books. or the letters in there,
Yes.
which is interesting. So,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, like first I want to say, folks, lines are open. This is a call-in show. I don't know if I said it was a call-in show at the beginning of the show. This is a call-in show, folks. Please, we want to hear from you guys. Come talk to us. Again, this is Truth Wanted. If you want to talk about Bigfoots and aliens and all kinds of stuff, you're more than welcome to call about that too. Awesome. But hey, if you got something specifically for Keith or specifically for me, now's a good time to do that. But I've been trying to say to people as well, and this idea that I came to terms with, all right, like it's just like, you know, you can either adapt and figure out new understandings of the world, or you can sit here and die on this hill and call
because they've deified Mary, right, to this point where now they basically worship Mary. She was perfect, she was sinless, and all this stuff, right? And so evangelical Christians think, oh, that's horrible. Well, look what they've done. That's not, the Bible doesn't say anything about that. But in a way, a lot of Christians who treat the Bible this way, you know, they wouldn't be comfortable with the idea, and not only that, not only could Paul be wrong about something, check this out. What if Paul wrote something, let's say Galatians, which was his first letter, and he was fully convinced about something in Galatians, and then later on, let's say, you know, a few years later, he changed, don't believe that anymore. Could he then write something different in Romans or 1 Corinthians? Like, could he change his mind like a normal human being?
Right.
And so, again, most Christians aren't comfortable with those ideas that that Paul could be wrong about something, or that Paul could change his mind about something like any other person can, right? But again, it just puts a finger on it shines a light on the fact that for many Christians, they've gotten to this place where they worship the Bible. They act as if I'm going to throw this out now because this may be something we can talk about. Maybe someone wants to call in about this because, you know, come on. It says in 1 Timothy 3:16 that all scripture is godly, inerrant, and infallible. There can't be mistakes. There can't be problems, right? Well, the problem with that, first of all, 1 Timothy is one of those letters that we're pretty sure Paul did not write. So number one, Paul didn't say that. Number two, even if, okay, I'll give it to you. Let's just say maybe he did say that. Go and look in the Greek for that sentence. So if you go and do any kind of like interlinear study and you look up the Greek text for that passage, so your English Bible will say all scripture is God-breathed. But in the Greek, the word scripture does not for the writings. So literally what it actually says is all God-breathed writings are, you know, useful for instruction and teaching and righteousness and training in righteousness and things like that. And so that begs the question, well, then what's a God-breathed writing? And I think the answer should be any writing that you read that you find useful for anything. I mean, you know, Chronicles of Narnia, or, you know, it's a really great lesson here. This speaks to me. You know, in other words, inspiration. Let's do this too real quick.
What if it's literally like the Satanic Bible, though?
Well, I never read it, but I'm sure there's great stuff in it. I'm sure there's great stuff in it. I mean, all right. I've heard that this, like some of the satanic commandments,
just any satanic work,
are actually better in many respects than some of the 10 Commandments, and I don't doubt that. But I mean, in the sense, like, okay, it's also the way we think of inspiration when we say that the Scripture is inspired, and this might be an in-house conversation between Christians, but I don't know how atheists care about this or not. But for Christians talking to other Christians, like, I would encourage them, you know, when we say that something is inspired, right? So, like, to me, if I'm driving in my car and I listen to Alanis Morissette and there's a song on the radio and it just speaks to my heart and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm crying, and I feel like, oh, this is beautiful and this is inspiring and it helped me in some way, it encouraged me in some way, I feel like a better person now, I'm gonna call my mom and tell her I love her, and, you know, whatever. I would say that was inspired. But if I told my Christian friend what happened and I say, wow, I listened to this song, I really felt like it was inspired, and they say, well, did God write that song? No, God, I'm not saying God wrote it. Well, was that song inerrant and infallible? No, but I don't, but it's still inspired. You know what I'm saying?
Sure,
so something can be inspired and we don't have to go straight to, oh, but therefore it must be inerrant and infallible and God wrote it. And God said it.
I think the view I had was like, like the Holy Spirit had to have some sort of influence on you. You know, like it had to move the Holy Spirit within you somehow to be God ordained or something. And I don't know if that was kind of my theology, but obviously that doesn't mean much to me now. So,
well, that is sort of the assumption, you know, that, we think because we believe in the Holy Spirit, yes, the Holy Spirit in some way must have been, you know, working through. But again, God didn't write the Bible, people did. And, you know, people have a pretty bad track record for being 100% accurate and making no mistakes and all that. So again, I think someone can be inspired and could write something in that moment to those people.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, is that, Paul, most of the New Testament, we don't even know the specific thing that was being addressed. We only have one side of this telephone conversation. And I think no one would be more appalled and shocked that, and I'm not saying there's nothing in it that would be helpful or,
sure. But you can say that with a lot of things. That doesn't mean I worship them and say that this is the divine authority that I must adhere to at all times. Yeah,
exactly. And so, part of the, I don't know.
I think I agree with you. I don't think it should be about that either. I think it causes
same things. And I think your guest also pointed out to the caller that, if of course you were, I think it's possible for people to, to change their minds about something. I get where Christians come from when they want to play that game. It's just like you said on that call, like, well, okay, Christianity has to be the greatest thing ever. So why would anybody ever walk away from the greatest thing ever? Well, it must be because they were never really in the club. They didn't really get it, right? They didn't really understand it. And that's why that's the only reason why they'd walk away, because they didn't really get it. They didn't really understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously I agree because I said those things. But yeah, like, no, I still feel the same way, I guess. Like you can't, it's Christianity is from the very get-go, from my view, is an ever-changing club. And the rules for that club have been changing and are still changing all the time. So it's hard to just, say, oh, once and for all, I either was or wasn't. I mean, I was definitely a part of something. You're right. I don't know what you would call me if I wasn't right. A very, very, very confused person, which would be a lot of people, I guess. Maybe, we're all a little confused, maybe, but like, you know what I mean? It's not the same thing. Like, I genuinely believe that I was a Christian. I genuinely believed I had the Holy Spirit in me and was working in me. And whether or not that was true on a metaphysical level or not, like, that's what I believed. And so I acted on those beliefs. And so to me, that's where identity starts. It's from the psychology of yourself. If somebody tells me that they're a Christian and they're consistent with that belief that they hold to be true, why would I say otherwise, even if it doesn't match some other person's metaphysical identification of what that word means? So
this is one of the key problems that I think, we talk about a lot of this on the Heretic Happy Hour. Like the title Heretic Happy Hour is kind of tongue in cheek. We've all been called heretics, all the hosts. So we just kind of, let's just roll with it. Right. But here's the thing about this whole thing about when one Christian calls another Christian a heretic, right? Yeah. What they don't understand when they do that, first of all, what they're doing is saying, look, you disagree. I have these 10 things that I think, that I believe that I'm right about these things. And I can't be wrong about them. I'm not wrong. So in a way, I guess what they're doing is they're making themselves the standard for truth in the universe. And so they're not wrong. They have the correct information about God or whatever. And hey, I heard you say some things I disagree with. So because you disagree with me, and I'm the standard for all truth, and I can't be wrong, you're a heretic. And what they don't understand when they say that is there's another Christian down the road who has a different list of things, who would hear his list and say, oh, you don't believe this or that. You know what? You're a heretic. So everyone is somebody's heretic. It's become this meaningless.
But Jesus was considered a heretic too. I mean,
yes, he was, exactly.
It comes full circle at the end of the day,
But so the bottom line is that, like, Christianity has become, it's morphed into this monster. To me, it's become this thing it was never meant to be, where it's all about having the right information. Like, we act as if it's all about, do you have the right information about God? If I gave you those 10 questions on a quiz, could you answer them all correctly? And if you get 100 on the test, that makes you a Christian. And I just think that's ridiculous. That is not at all what it's about. I think we've gone down this wrong path where we've made it about, and again, that's the reason why, if you suddenly decide, I don't believe that one point anymore. I doubt that. Or I don't think that's real. Or I'm going to change it. And I don't believe this. I believe this other thing about this other point on that list of things that I used to believe. Well, all of a sudden now you're a heretic. You're not a real Christian. You've fallen away, whatever. And then, people who are deconstructing, that's what happens. They start changing some of those beliefs that they used to have. Then suddenly they don't match, their list doesn't match anybody else's list. And now they're immediately rejected and, you're out. You're not, I can't hang out with you anymore.
And that's where that alienation comes in, that sense of self-doubt. That's where the gaslighting can come in sometimes, depending on where you're at and like the system that you're a part of, you know, the social organization of your church can play a part in that. And that's where I think that's where you and I would probably find the most common ground, is that we're both against that. We both definitely don't want that. We don't want, I don't want the Christian church to be a system, a cycle of abuse for people. Because I think it can be. I think it has the tools and powers to be that. And that's where I will always like stand up and say, no, I don't want this for anybody. And it irks me. It irks me when other Christians will say, well, you just left because you were hurt by the church or somebody hurt you. And it's like, well, yeah, like that's a problem. Like, you know, and their point is, oh, well, theologically it's still true. Your group just sucks. Like that's what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
But they ignore okay, but like, do you see that this is happening though? And like, it's happening literally every day, every single day. People are leaving because of this. And where they go after that is going to be up to you. You can change that by being a good person to them and helping them through what they're going through, and maybe providing a safe space for them to question and doubt and figure themselves out. Or you can judge them, make them feel worse about themselves, and make them never want to talk to you again. Because either way, that's, you know, that's what people have that choice in that conversation.
Yeah, and you know, you would think that people who say that they're following this guy Jesus, who was all about this, he was about this Prince of Peace, he was all about love your neighbor, love one another as I have loved you. In fact, this is how they will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Yeah, you'd think if you really took that seriously, those two options you just presented, it should be obvious which one I should follow, right? I should put my arm around them. Hey, it's okay. Yeah. Everybody has questions. No big deal. You know, take your time. This is a safe place. It's all right. It doesn't really matter. You know, like here I'm there. I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything. Yeah, that's what you would hope you would expect, and instead. It's sort of like shun the unbeliever, and we just destroy them and kick them out. And I mean, gosh, I've grown son and a daughter, and he can't see his grandkids. They've shut him off because he's, you know, doesn't believe in eternal torment, or because you know, he has questions about the deity of Christ or something like.
I want to talk to you because you wrote about the doctrine of eternal torment and stuff about but we really should get to some calls. So we're about at that time. So before we do that though, we need to shout out our patron of the week, because every single week, Keith, we shout out the patrons that donate to patreon.com/truthwanted to help this show keep going. This show is almost entirely run by volunteers like myself. And so all the money that goes to this helps towards pay for equipment. We're going to get a new green screen, folks, that actually works. And some other stuff is going to be cool. And that's being funded by you guys at home. So thank you if you donate on patreon.com. But I need to shout out this week's patron. And this week's patron of the week is Ruben H. Ruben H. Thank you so much for donating to patreon.com/truthwanted. You are awesome. And thank you to everybody else who donates to the show. You guys are the best, and you help keep this train going. So awesome stuff. Now it's time to get to some calls here. Keith, are you ready to talk to some people?
Bring it on. Let's do it.
Cool. Let's do it. So first person I want to talk to is Robert, who is calling in from Texas. Robert from Texas, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hi, first call. Yeah.
Heck yeah, Robert. What's up?
Yeah, my question is mostly for Keith, but Dan, if you want to chime in as well. I've encountered both from people I know personally that study to be ministers, but also from people like William Lane Craig and the YouTube channel Inspiring Philosophy. It's this view that like the first 10 books or so of Genesis, like the creation story, Garden of Eden, Noah, the Tower of Babel, that is all obviously mythology or happened, but in some limited way. But then they will go on to say that everything after that, starting with Abraham and his descendants, that's all history. They'll go on to say that is history, that is historical fact, even down to Abraham having camels, which is something I think has been disproven or something. But I was wondering what you guys thought about that point of view, because to me, it's setting you up to be disappointed later. I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, great question, by the way. I just want to recommend an excellent resource to sort of, if anyone interested in that topic. There's a book by Richard Elliott Friedman. It's called Who Wrote the Bible? And it's not a dry, boring sort of theological book. It's actually written almost like a mystery novel, like a thriller. And it's a page turner. It's really very, very engaging and exciting. And he's essentially answering exactly that question about, who wrote the Bible? And like, for example, noticing the fact that all those early Old Testament passages, for example, there are two versions of the same story. If you ever try to slog through and read the Old Testament, you probably notice like you'll read something in chapter 10, and you get to chapter 11, and they'll tell you the same thing basically again. Like, I just read this. Why are they telling me again?
Mm-hmm.
And that happens all through the Old Testament. And the reason why is that there was a time in Israel's history, there were two kingdoms. There was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And so there were two separate Jewish communities. But yet they had sort of their own, still had their own sort of, their parables, their stories of Genesis or Abraham or Moses or these kind of things. But each community had slightly different versions of these stories. For example, the one in the south was where the temple was. And so they tended to emphasize the importance of the priesthood. There's only one, proper, correct way to offer sacrifices, and it must be in the temple, and it must be by a priest. And if you don't, you're in trouble. But of course, the ones in the northern kingdom, since they didn't have access to the temple, were sort of like, God doesn't care about that. It's not a big deal. And so you kind of get these two different flavors. And at some point, the kingdoms came together again. They think it was during the reign of King Josiah. And so to reconcile these two separate communities that for so long had been separate, someone literally edited these two separate Bibles into one Bible, which is the one we have now, the Old Testament we have now. It's a fascinating story. And what he actually does is try to figure out who was the person in history who actually did this. So number one is showing that it happened. And number two, demonstrating it happened. And two, then figuring out sort of CSI Jerusalem, who did this. It's a fascinating book. And he gets into all the facts that, things that you kind of alluded to. Like, we know there are multiple, stories of a flood, right? There are flood stories that predate Judaism. Yeah. There are different stories of creation. There are different stories of different cultures. We found them. We know that parallel pretty closely some of the stories that end up kind of retold with Jewish names in the Old Testament. And I think that's probably accurate. They were parables and stories. I really don't believe there was a talking snake. I don't really believe that there's a talking donkey. I mean, again, these are parables and stories. Most Jewish rabbis and teachers are very, very comfortable with the fact that these are stories, that it's not a documentary, it's not some historical, factual thing. And again, we have no evidence that there was ever a kingdom like David ever reigned ever on a throne in Jerusalem ever. All these kinds of things. There's no evidence of an Exodus. There is no archaeological evidence for a lot of these things. It doesn't mean those stories, again, the Jewish people know that, and they don't really care. They value there's wisdom in some of these texts that they take to heart. And I think a lot of Christians could benefit from backing off a little bit from this insistence that these are, if I had a time machine and went back in time, I could shake Adam's hand, or I could meet, these people. Like, I think we need to at least entertain the possibility that isn't the case.
Yeah, this was a part of my journey with figuring this stuff out, because like I've mentioned this on the show before, but I never struggled with like evolution as a concept. I was never like a young earth creationist, but I knew a lot of people that did. And so, obviously you at some point, if you're really considering this, you kind of have to reconcile that, because the Bible doesn't really support the idea of evolution any way whatsoever. It doesn't really work. So like, when you start to think about it and you look at these texts, and then again, like you're talking about, when you're looking at, well, who really wrote this stuff? Well, I don't think it was Moses.
No.
I don't think Moses one, it talks about him in third person. And while that doesn't necessarily count as evidence against it, it also just doesn't make sense based on what we know about the language and the time periods of which these texts were written, as well as what Keith was talking about. There are multiple versions of the same stories put together in certain parts. There's two different creation stories.
Yes,
there's two different flood stories, really three, kind of like 1, 2.5. And it's like you don't think about it, because when we learn about a lot of these texts, we go in Sunday school and we like read like a paragraph, and then you're done for the day. You don't really like sit down and read about it. And when you kind of do that exercise for yourself, and you're like, what the heck? This doesn't make any sense. These are two different things. Suddenly it makes more sense when you look at it from this perspective of these were human beings collecting these stories and recording them as part of their own culture's beliefs and culture's writings, and had radically different interpretations of what modern Christians believe today. And like, you can look at old Jewish texts and see the rabbinic commentaries on this stuff, and they had way different thoughts. Like, it was not completely accepted at any point in the history of these stories that these were always meant to be taken literally. I don't think that's the case. I think history demonstrates that otherwise. And so it's funny when Christians talk about like, oh, you have to take these literally, because like the Jewish people today, a lot of them do not take those stories literally. So and like they were there first. So like not the people today, but like, it's like their beliefs come from a commentary and tradition that's older than Christianity. So it's something that we have to consider for sure.
Yes.
So there you go, Robert. What do you think?
I mean, from what I've studied, most of that, so I've encountered, that the hypothesis about the theories about the divided kingdom authorship, and some of it I've probably read even later than that. I would think probably too. I think I guess my only thing left would be Keith, is do you take as someone who's still a believer, do you take some personal meaning from maybe some of these early Genesis stories? I don't know.
No, honestly. I mean, I know there are some good things in these stories. I mean, there's some that I appreciate more than others. Like I really love, I mean, I've always really loved like the Joseph story about how his brothers sell him into slavery, and that whole thing about how they think he's dead, but he's the Pharaoh, and he tests them to find out if they change their heart. And he goes and cries behind the pillar, and I think it's a beautiful story. I mean, I would love to see a movie that would really do it justice. I think it's a wonderful story, but it's a story. I don't look at these things as historical. And now maybe some of them are. I mean, I'm okay if they are. I'm okay if they're not. In other words, I don't have such a faith in the Bible. This is the problem. This is why for a lot of Christians, this what we're talking about makes them really nervous, because they have kind of put all their eggs in this basket that they kind of have more faith in the Bible than anything. And the minute you start pulling the thread on the fact that the Bible isn't what I thought it was, well, now suddenly I don't know what's true, right? So it makes them nervous. So that's kind of think that's why I try to encourage Christians, don't put too much stock in whether this is literal or this really happened or not.
But I think it's more beautiful to wrestle with that. Like obviously I'm a skeptic now, but even when I was a Christian, like I was more fond of the idea of like having that be a lifelong relationship with the text. I think that's a kind of a Jewish thing too. You see that in some rabbinic commentaries also. Like obviously, like I don't have any specific religious meaning with any of this text at all. I try to view it from an academic perspective, and then sometimes from a comedy perspective on this show. But when I was a Christian, like that made sense to me. It's hard for me now to look back and view it the way that I did. But it's also because I didn't have a complete picture of this text. I wasn't given all the pieces to start to work with. And I wonder what my religious identity would look like if I was given all that information from the start, or if even I would have a religious identity at all, if I would still come back to the place I'm at. But anyway, Robert, we got to get to some other callers. Thanks for calling in.
All right.
Great call. Great question. And looking forward to some more great conversations. Let's get to another call here. We're going to talk to Lucas calling in from Texas. Hey, Lucas, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, man?
Going good. How can we help you?
Man, called last week, and I won't take as much time. Y'all gave me a lot of time last week, but figured I'd call, let you know about this conversation I had earlier this week with my brother, one of my brothers who's a preacher. It was pretty interesting. So after I told you last week about the video I shared with my sister, I kind of felt like talking with my brother about some of the stuff in that video, and mainly about how how God like demands worship for pretty much anything, you know. And talking with him about this, he responded like if I asked him, like, I think I asked him, what would you say is like God, can he do anything he wants with no consequences or whatever? And he responded to me with Isaiah 55:8-9. And that's a verse in the Bible where it says, God says, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And I was just like, okay, well, that really doesn't answer the question directly. Like, so you're just, that's
kind of the biblical version of do it because I said so. Right?
Yeah, basically. And what I pointed out to him is all that means is might makes right. And he said he had never heard of that before. So I explained to him might makes right about how pretty much whoever has the power, whatever they do is considered good. Like they can't be judged for it because they have the power. And I asked him if that's how he views God. And he didn't give me a direct answer. He pretty much just, he like tried to dance around and say, God has done so much in my life and I have such a relationship with God. And I was like, dude, you're not answering the question. Like, if you don't want to answer the question, that's fine. And then he goes, fine, I'll answer straight up. And he goes, yes, I think no matter what God does, he is true and he is real and he is the only thing that matters and something like that. And I just kind of ended the conversation after that because, I mean, if it wasn't my family, I'd probably go off on them. But it's like, what do I say to that?
Sure. I mean, like, if you would say that about any human being on Earth, you would say that's an unhealthy relationship you have with that person, right? Like, we wouldn't want anybody to have authority over our lives like that. And it is kind of frustrating and frightening to see. Although, but I would have said the same thing when I was a Christian. Keith, I'm very curious about how you respond to this because, like, this was definitely kind of my thought. I think if I really deconstructed how I was, especially as a kid, I think that's how I kind of viewed my idea of God.
Absolutely, yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians have a view of God. My most recent book I put out is sort of critiquing what's known as penal substitutionary atonement theory, and it's this pretty much probably in America, especially in the West, it's the dominant view of understanding the crucifixion here on Good Friday, right? Or on Good Friday, and
which is also, I just recently learned why it's called Good Friday. I didn't know this because when you say Good Friday, it's like, well, that's the day that he like died. It shouldn't be like a good thing, kind of, but like it's supposed to be like the old word for holy, right? I think that was my understanding of it. But
yeah. So, but but see, when you have a Christianity that is comfortable with a God who is, number one, his disposition is he's angry, he's wrathful, he's a God of wrath. You're a filthy worm. You're a wretch and a sinner, and he's pretty disgusted with you, and he pretty much just wants to end you because you're sick and disgusting. And so maybe he wants to do that, but then his son jumps in and takes the beating. So now, okay, he's satisfied, and I guess now he can love you and forgive you. I mean, that is a pretty sick and twisted view of God, in my opinion. And in fact, that's this view of, it sounds like the volcano God. I mean, it sounds like the gods are angry. Right. What should we do? Quick, let's get something innocent and let's beat it and burn it and bleed it. And there you go. Now the gods are happy again. And evangelical Christians have embraced a version of Christianity that basically they believe in a volcano God. And I think that is absolutely upside down and backwards from even Judaism. That's not even who like we think of the Old Testament God being, he's a little more harsh and he's a little more wrathful. Like he's not even that bad in the Old Testament. Like, how do you get that out of anything? And I want to say specifically on the Isaiah 55, because I hear this all the time too. When I usually hear that when I'm trying to suggest that Jesus, no kidding, really was a nonviolent, person. He really seriously did advocate for us to not use violence and not respond with violence. And then Christians will kind of quote Old Testament violence passages. And then here's what solves everything. Isaiah 55. Well, God's ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. But here's what I find really frustrating about that being used as the default answer to why is God a raging wrath monster who would, like, if anybody else did it, we would call him Hitler, right? Someone who just like torture people, kill people, burn people, killed babies, and told other people to go rip open pregnant babies and don't show any mercy. Like, oh, but God does it, it's okay. And why? Oh, because of Isaiah 55, God says my ways are higher than your ways. So here's the thing. That passage in Isaiah where God says that, what he's emphasizing is, I'm more merciful than you are. I'm more loving than you are. I have more kindness for these enemies, for these infidels. And so it's God saying in Isaiah, I'm better than you are. I'm more loving than you are. I'm more compassionate than you are. It's not God saying, I'm more twisted and crazy than you are. All right, I'm more angry than you are, more wrathful. It's the opposite of that. So that really just drives me nuts. It's like taking something that actually means the opposite.
What do you think, though, Keith?
That's the weird thing.
I want to ask you because, I hear what you're saying. I think, like, people often, obviously this comes down to this argument of like, oh, context in the Bible and stuff and interpretation, things like that. And I think in this case, you're probably right. But, I can't help but wonder, because there are Old Testament passages that describe people using God as kind of their justification for the invasion of other nations, right? Because like God said that they were doing it. And I don't know what you think on the actual historicity of that, but like, to me, an explicit reading of some of those texts is using God as the be all end all for violence. And, do you think that's like true in terms of what the Bible actually says, or what the author's intentions were, or?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. I think what we see in those Old Testament passages, and by the way, we see it in the history of how America was colonized, not only the way American colonists treated Native Americans, but how American colonists treated each other. Puritans were killing Quakers, you know what I mean? Because they didn't agree on stuff. It's pretty messed up. And so to me, this is why I say this quite often. Again, there's a difference between something being biblical and something being Christ-like. Okay. And so, for example, these things are biblical, meaning the Bible affirms them, never really condemns them. And as you just said, Dan, people throughout history have used the Bible to justify them. And these are things like genocide, war, torture, patriarchy, polygamy, slavery. Those are things that are biblical. All those things are biblical. And for me, I would say, yeah, but none of those things are like Jesus. Like, I think if you start at Jesus, you can't say, yeah, slavery's cool. Or, torture's all right.
Didn't Jesus have the parable with the slaves, though?
Yeah, we can
Did he
look
say
at that.
slaves obey his masters and stuff?
Yes, right? Yes, exactly.
Even the cruel ones, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think Jesus is the one saying that. I think Paul says that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Paul gives, and here's the thing, though, that's in one of those pseudo letters of Paul. The Philemon, which is a letter to a slave owner whose slave has escaped, is a masterful letter in manipulation.
Yeah, you're right. That's going to be embarrassing later if people point me out in the comments.
It's a beautiful thing. It's because Paul is urging this slave owner to treat that slave like the way he would treat Paul. As a brother and as a friend. Like, you're not allowed to treat him as property anymore. But then there's other passages, right, that are these are the ones that came later, not really written by Paul, that have a much stronger sort of hierarchy and control, kind of, obey your masters kind of a thing, where then that creeps in, where it is more about like, just don't upset the status quo.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Lucas, thanks so much for your call. We got some other callers we want to get to. Appreciate you calling in again. Yeah, that's interesting. Because, like, would you agree that, like, this idea of being Christ-like, I think in concept, in theory, is a beautiful thing. But with the intersubjectivity of this idea, doesn't it ultimately become sort of corrupted by people one way or another? Like, do you think that that's a realistic standard for people to follow? Because to me, it's always going to be subject to human interpretation, isn't it? And I don't know if there's any way around that, but like, I don't know. To me, that gives me some pause, because like when somebody says I need to be Christ-like, like, well, that doesn't really mean anything to me, because my Christ-like is always going to be different from somebody else's Christ-like, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you make a good point in the sense that can something be twisted or corrupted for nefarious means? Yes. Has it? Yes. So yeah, of course it's possible. I think that's probably possible with anything. But for me, I think if you start with the red letters, if you start with the Sermon on the Mount, if you start with this idea of, what if you love those who love you in return, what credit is that for you? And everyone does that, right? But you have this higher standard of loving even those who don't love you and blessing those who curse you, doing good to those who hate you, overcoming evil with good, and not responding with more, evil or violence or retribution and things like that. So that's what I'm talking about, right? And so I think there are examples of people who aren't even Christians. Like Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount like every day, like the last several years of his life. Every day he woke up and read the Sermon on the Mount. Most Christians don't do that. I don't do that.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? I think that there's a thing where if you start with Jesus and your intention is, what did he talk about? What was he about? How did he live his life in a way like, okay, that there's something great there. There's something really positive there. And I think it sets us on a trajectory that leads us away from a whole lot of things that are pretty toxic that I would say are biblical.
Interesting. Yeah. To me, I guess, like I struggle to see how Jesus is the necessary component in that, or Christianity even is the necessary component in that. Because I like the humanist label, the sentientist label, something else I take on. And to me, I kind of see that as all the good things you just said there, but there's no religion involved in that. There's none of this, the problems that come with that. There's still problems with it. Don't get me wrong, because it's still just as subject to human interpretation as anything else.
Yes.
But it also doesn't have the baggage that Christianity does. It does. Like to be honest with you, it's like
bringing up our baggage, man.
Yeah.
Well, we have some.
There's there's an unspoken hierarchy there. I mean, like even if we deconstruct it, I mean, you and I can deconstruct Christianity all day, and I love these conversations. But it's hard because I know that you and I would be the minority in this view. And I don't probably forever. I don't know. Actually, I don't know that. I don't know what Christianity is going to look like 50 years from now. But
well, I take some hope in this deconstruction movement that we're kind of talking about, because what's happening is people are moving away from these toxic ideas, these toxic theologies that really ultimately are about controlling people, keeping them in a place of fear and shame or guilt. These are the things they're deconstructing. These are the things they're moving away from. I'm saying, no, I don't think that this is who God is. I think if there is a God, I think he's like Jesus. I think, Jesus says, if you've seen the Father, you've seen me. And so, okay, well then let's look at Jesus as our example of what God is like and what we want to be like as ourselves. And I think if Christianity starts getting back to something like that, and again, this is also something, though, not in the context of church. You know what I'm saying? So you use the reference about hierarchy and things like that.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think Jesus is anti-hierarchy. Twice he says, he points first of all to the Jewish hierarchy. He points to the Pharisees and he says to his disciples, do you see how these Pharisees lord it over others? Not so with you. You are all brothers and equals, right? And then he also points to, in another place, he points his disciples to a secular hierarchy. He points to the Romans. And he says, look how they also, lord it over one another. Not so with you. You are all equals and brothers. And, don't call any man father. You have only one Father. That's your God in heaven. Don't call any person teacher. You only have one teacher. That's Christ. And so there is an implicit. Now, I know in practice, some Christians don't do that. They ignore that completely. Yeah. But I'm saying, I do that. I've walked away from that, and I don't go to a church. I don't attend any kind of a church. I don't call anybody my spiritual authority, and I kind of feel like I shouldn't. It's not necessary.
Yeah, I'm all about, and I think you're right. Jesus does talk about breaking down the hierarchies of his times, but in that same context, right? Isn't he also just saying that he's the authority? Is he just telling people to follow him? Doesn't it just create a new kind of way of?
Yeah.
He had his followers. He literally had followers.
No, exactly. Yeah. But you know what? Here's what I see, and I don't know if you see this or not, but this is what I see that's different. What I see in Jesus is someone who isn't selfish, right? So when he says "follow me," he's saying, emulate my behaviors because I'm someone who isn't violent, because I'm someone who isn't hierarchical. Jesus doesn't lord it over anybody.
Unless you're selling stuff at the temple. then he's going to throw some.
Yeah, but exactly. But like, so example, does Jesus lord it over people, or does he take off his outer tunic, wrap a towel around his waist, which is what slaves did, get on his knees and wash his disciples' feet, and then after he does it, he sits up and says, "Do you know what I've done for you? I've set you an example that you should follow, and now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them." In other words, he models. He doesn't just say it; he models it. So if we're following him truly, we're in a posture of coming underneath people. We're serving them. We're not demanding they serve us, right? We're being people who are radically humble and serving and blessing other people around us, regardless of who they are. It doesn't matter if they're Samaritans or Gentiles or Jesus doesn't care about those things. So I mean, yeah, sure, he has followers. Yes, he's saying follow me, but it's an alternative way of living and thinking and being that. I mean, I get your point.
Yeah.
In the sense that we don't need. Why do we need Christianity? Why do we need Jesus?
If somebody today, let's say somebody today was practicing the same things that Jesus was doing.
Yes.
Right. And they said, like, you have to follow me to come do this thing. Like, we would say that they're followers of that person. Like, and then there is like a guru to apprenticee kind of relationship there a little bit. Right. I mean, like, that's kind of what the followers of Jesus were. They did see him as, and they called him Lord, right? Like there is something there, and that's something that I can't separate that. I don't know, and that troubles me. I think that gives me trouble.
I totally I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is absolutely. If there's somebody who's demanding submission, right? I think that's a dangerous thing. I tell people all the time, actually, if you're part of a church that's demanding submission, run. Submission isn't something that people should demand of you, but it's something, I think in the case of Jesus.
Do you think Jesus demanded submission?
Not in that sense. No, not in the way we're talking about it. I don't think he's saying, or else. I mean, because there's always sort of this threat associated with this, you better obey me.
Yeah. But you don't have that kind of atonement. That your theology on that is different.
Very different. Yeah. Because actually the Old Testament doesn't breathe a word about eternal torment, not a single verse about eternal torment. It's like a couple thousand years, God slips his mind, forgets to mention, oh yeah, I'm going to roast some of you for eternity. I'll get to that later.
I got you.
And then when Jesus is supposedly using that kind of language, that hell language, ironically, he's quoting Old Testament prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea. And they're not talking about where anyone goes after they die. That's not the kind of language. That's not what's being talked about. It's not where anyone goes after they die. Yeah. So again, I wrote a whole book on this. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But this is a great rabbit hole that we're going down. We do have some other callers want to get.
Okay, let's take some calls.
I'm really glad you're open to having these conversations with us, Keith. Thank you for giving us that perspective on this show.
I love this. I love this stuff.
Let's go over to Zeph calling in from Illinois. Zeph, what's up?
Hello. Thank you.
Hey.
Thanks for taking my call, Dan. Thank you, Keith.
What's up,
I did have a question.
What can we do for you? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think this follows after what he was saying. I really had questions about like what the thought is about the nature of the soul. Now, to give context, like I was a Christian for years, and now I'm not. And I was wondering, like, if there's this contingent on belief, why is it that God didn't, take me earlier? But it goes further than that because, my dad had a stroke, and he is a vastly different person after the stroke as he was before the stroke. And I was wondering, like, in terms of the soul, like, is his soul like the person that he was before? Is it the person that he was after? Is it some combination of those, or is it some like unknown? And what does that mean in terms of salvation or heaven or hell or the afterlife? That's the part that I'm kind of confused about.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say up front, I'm the wrong kind of Christian to ask these kinds of questions about who's saved or who's not or who's in or who's out. Because in my view, a very radical view, which by the way, is a Christian view. I mean, believe it or not, for the first 400 years of church history, the majority of Christians embraced something called universal reconciliation or apokatastasis. And it was only after, probably after Augustine, that the doctrine of eternal torment started to gain, traction. So, but again, for the first 400 years, if you were a Christian, you were probably someone who believed in universal reconciliation or ultimate reconciliation. And in that view, I have to clarify, it's not the view that nobody, quote unquote, passes through the fire. It's actually the view that everyone does. Everybody, good, bad, Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, you, me, everybody. We all pass through the fire, but the point is that the fire is a metaphor for sort of like this post-mortem process that everyone would go through. And the point and the purpose of that process is only to bring us to the place that we can share, in God's holiness and righteousness. So it's not torture. It's not just pain for the sake of, pain. That's not what it's about. It's more of a refining. Paul talks about this idea, right? All will pass through the fire. And if there's gold and silver and precious stones, those will be revealed. Wood, hay, and stubble will be burned up. And then he says something shocking. If you go through the fire and there's nothing, there's no gold, no silver, no precious stones, it's all wood, hay, and stubble, and it all burns up. He says this, yet all will be saved, and even as those who pass through the fire. So, and that's just one verse. There's many, many verses that most of us don't see as Christians because no one ever points them out to us, or we read them and we go, "No, I can't mean that," and we move on. So there, in my view, there is no being saved or not being saved. Everyone is, quote unquote, saved if what you mean, because what I believe is that everyone is already connected to God and always has been. And so when you die, you'll continue to be. There is no separation from God, whatever God is. And something that's really helped me, I'm going to recommend another book. There's a book actually by a guy named Amit Goswami. He's a doctor. It's a book on quantum theory, quantum science.
Oh man, we're going quantum, Keith.
Oh,
we're
yeah.
going quantum. That's we got to
I'm
bust
ready to
open
look
the
it up.
box. We have a whole breaking case of quantum comes up.
Let's do it. Let's
on
do it.
Truth Wanted. No. I mean, I hate the
Tell me.
quantum stuff. I'll be honest. I hate
Okay.
every single quantum conversation we've ever had on this show.
All right, well, I'm
It
sorry.
never goes good.
I'm sorry what I'm taking us there.
But,
But the book is called The Self-Aware Universe, and it's looking, again, it would call it consciousness. But anyway, basing it on scripture, I would point to things like 1 John, which says that God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And I wish my Southern Baptist pastor would preach a sermon on that. I would pay him money. Preach a sermon on that verse, please. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. Bring it on. I'd love to hear that.
Interesting. Yeah, the soul stuff, I agree with you, Zeph. Like a traditional understanding of the soul doesn't really jive with me. It doesn't make sense, especially everything that we know about physiology now with how the brain works with the rest of the body. It seems like if you change a part of your brain, you're changing ultimately your representation of self. And if the soul is supposed to be some sort of representation of self, and that can be changed through physical means, then I don't know what it means to have like a soul that isn't like part of the physical, or if the physical plays so much into who we are, then it doesn't make sense that there's something outside of the physical that is us somewhere. I don't know what that means, and I don't understand when people talk about it. So that's kind of my take on it, which is a naturalist take. But yeah.
Can I just say something too? Like, what would you say to the idea that, because to me, like, for example, like you sharing about your dad having a stroke, and my dad had some dementia before he passed back in August, and my mother-in-law also has had some behavior. She had some strokes as well, and has trouble talking and speaking, and her behavior has gotten much more violent and unpredictable and things like that. And so I hear what you're saying. I've been through that kind of stuff. So I guess my thing would be, what if the soul was what you were experiencing before anyone had these problems? And then when they have brain damage or they have some kind of a problem, it's simply that the mechanism, it's sort of like the person is still there, but it's like we have a bad connection, right? That now suddenly I'm not hearing it clearly because the mechanism, the brain, the speech, the part that communicates is broken. It's not, but they're still in there.
What you're saying is like
coming through differently.
The body is like a receiver to the soul, kind of.
Well, because
Yeah,
I don't, because I'm not, yeah, I'm
Because
not a
I don't know.
materialist.
Because I don't. Here's my thing with the soul, Keith. Because I don't know what it means. Because I don't know how you differentiate a biological being that has a soul that doesn't have a soul. Now, I've posed this question to people before, and some people say, well, all animals and other organisms have souls. And if that's the case, then I don't even know what soul means at that point. It just seems too non-specific to be defined. There has to be a way for us to like look at it and call it a thing in order for it to be meaningful to me in some sense. And I have the same thing with when we talk about the idea of God in general or spirits in general, because at some point when it becomes so vague, it's hard for me to understand what it means to say, yes, I believe in this thing. Like obviously I see a person in you, Keith, and I think that like you exist and that you're emoting and you have all these things, but like a soul doesn't have to work in my framework, like conceptual framework, and for that to me to make sense. But yeah, Zeph, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, I did have something I wanted to say about this. I mean, there are those Snickers commercials where they say, you're not you when you're hungry.
Yeah.
This is kind of the idea, is that there are all sorts of like, naturalistic sort of causal explanations. When we're hungry, we might be more aggressive or more agitated or more angry. The same thing if we're without sleep, if we, are experiencing pain, because maybe an injury or because we're like just overworked. And, I feel like it would take a God, I mean, to discern, like, is this, causal based off of their, physical state, or is this really the core who they are? And I feel like that's just an unnecessary thing to add on there. It's just, we kind of are the state that we're in. And, if that means that we're pre-stroke, post-stroke, pre-dementia, post-dementia, pre-conversion, post-conversion, it's just, it's just kind of a recognition that, that's the state we exist in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So help me understand too. What do you feel about the idea of, for example, like human consciousness, right? So as I was a philosophy minor in college, and we spent a lot of time, talking about and studying this idea of like, what is human consciousness? Why do we have sort of this human consciousness, but deer and pigs and dogs or whatever don't? And so what is this consciousness? What is this that makes us in the sense that we're and so in your mind, is there sort of this sort of a consciousness? Well, but I guess I'm answering my own question. You probably would assume that consciousness is something that's a manifestation of your brain. Would you say that, or do you think it's something that would exist?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Well, I can answer that question. I mean, I'm a chemist, but it's like being a chemist doesn't mean that you're a neuroscientist.
Right.
It's just that the consciousness is kind of this, emergent property. And when you say, this has consciousness, that doesn't, you're really kind of like making a delineation. I know for a fact, I have an outdoor cat, and I know for a fact that outdoor cat is conscious. It will be mad at me if I don't feed it, and it will be out there like waiting for food, and it'll look at me and it will treat me different if I treat it different. I am 100% sure that cat is conscious, but I'm not sure that cat has a soul. I think that consciousness is, very much separate from this sort of, concept of some sort of core version of the self, that we are either struggling to attain or struggling against. It's just, it seems, kind of undefinable to me.
Yeah, I think I share some of that too, Zeph. Like, I think consciousness has always been kind of a vague word. And like the more that we study it, the more that we find that it gets really complicated. We're looking at smart thermostats, and you can make the argument that they are conscious on some level because they have an external response. They take external stimuli and process it and have an output. And that's like the basics of how we see conscious beings on some level. And so, like, does that mean that AI could be just as conscious as a human being? I don't know. I think it could be. Does that mean that they have an intersubjective sense of self like we do? I don't know. But either way, like when we get to that point, maybe that's something we'll never truly know because of the hard problem of consciousness that we can't ever seem to solve. But yeah, the idea of a soul, something that exists outside of it, doesn't really solve much either. I think it makes us ask more questions than it does solve. And I think that's my biggest contention with people talking about the soul, and especially in its relationship to consciousness, because I don't see it as answering quite anything. I think it's kind of an alternative explanation, but it's an explanation that also needs explanations. Like it doesn't really answer much for it. But that's all the time that we have for this call. So we're gonna have to move on to a different one. Zeph, thanks so much for calling in.
I did want to say that Keith, if all Christians were like you, then I'd still be a Christian.
There you go.
You're a great guy.
There you go.
Thank
Zeph,
you.
thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. It's one that we've had on this show before. Because then like you get into the quantum stuff, and I know like you want to get into the you have some ideas of the quantum stuff. Oh my god, the quantum stuff.
We don't have to go there. I'm reading this book, The Self-Aware Universe, and it's kind of mind-blowing to me. I understand probably 2/3 of it. If I'm lucky, maybe half of it. But I think the implications of it, again, this is not coming from religious people. These are coming from scientists. And many times they'll even stop themselves and say, hey, I know I sound like a theologian right now or a philosopher right now. Yeah. But I mean, to me, it's fascinating. If this is backed by science, if the implications of what it's saying are true, then it seems, I mean, as someone who does believe in a God and a soul or whatever,
sure,
and a post-death sort of, continuation.
I can see
it seems to say that, hey, maybe people were right about some of these things, like this idea that physics and reality aren't necessarily what we thought they were.
From that perspective, that makes sense because it becomes a justification for this belief, right? It becomes like, oh, here's some hard scientific evidence towards that conclusion. Well, for me, it's like first of all, I'm not a physicist, and I can't, I will always have a layman's understanding of it. Right. But I'm also, I'm just not convinced by what I've seen so far, but maybe that'll change. I don't know. That's just something I'm not convinced by at this point. But I want to get to at least like one more call here before we get to the end of our show here. Man, let's see. I want to talk to, let's talk to Milo from Arizona. I'm going to go with Milo from Arizona. Folks that are on the line, you can stay on. I don't know if we'll get to you, but we're going to see if we can as we get to the end. But Milo, you are on the line. What's up?
Hey guys. I've always been interested in the show, listen to it on podcasts all the time when I drive through work.
Awesome.
And I love the show. Thanks so much for having me on. I was just giving you guys a call just to discuss like a little tiny idea that I had. Like, major disclaimer, I don't necessarily believe in it whatsoever, but I would like to toss it at you guys and see what you think about it. Okay, shoot. Okay. So I recently had this like random thought that what if the idea of every God existing was real? And, every God has their own like stepping stone. What if, after life people become gods, and then there's the next step after that? And so, the gods that existed at one point in our world that don't exist anymore just kind of moved on to the next step in their existence, so to speak. And and it was a fun idea because it kind of made sense in the sense that, the Christian God kind of seems like he's handing over the world to Jesus Christ and moving on to his next step, kind of thing.
Wow.
I don't know. Like I think there's so many different like contradicting ideas of God and what that means that it would just be nonsensical to kind of get to that point. I don't know if that would really follow any sense of logic that I could understand. But Keith, what do you think?
I think it would make a really kick-ass anime.
Well,
yeah.
being an extreme weeb myself, I would agree with that.
So hey man, write that script.
There's like shows like Supernatural, I guess, and like others. Like I've never seen much of that show, but I know like this idea has kind of been done in fiction before. This idea of like, oh, what if we combined all the religions and beliefs, man, and put it into a reality? But like whenever those works of fiction are made, there's always some sort of rules to it or stories to it, and it ultimately becomes that author's interpretation of these beliefs. Like the Marvel movies. The Marvel movies idea of Thor isn't the same thing as what a lot of pagans believe, modern or ancient, right? So like, yeah, I think it's ultimately, again, it comes to this idea of, I think, my take on God and gods is that they are the inventions of human beings. And so they will stay in the minds of human beings and can be manipulated by that. And that's just how it always is. It wouldn't make a lot of sense in the reality that I know it, unless there's a reality I can't understand. But
yeah.
No, I honestly and wholeheartedly agree. Because for me, I was actually raised in the Mormon culture, and I don't know how much you know about that religion, but they essentially teach you that you strive to become gods. Like God.
I'm kind of dressed like a Mormon right now.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I know, right? You look just like a missionary. You're missing the black name.
Imagine me knocking on your door, huh? Yeah, that'd be fun.
I know, right? But yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, maybe that influenced the way that I was thinking. I definitely don't claim to be Mormon now. I'm actually in the process of removing my name from the records of the church. But I don't know. It was just a really fun idea, and I wanted to toss it at both a theist and someone who claims to be atheist as well, and just kind of get an idea of what you guys might think.
Yeah, Keith, you had another thought you wanted to throw out there too.
Yeah, how did you know that? I did.
Oh.
I just want to say briefly, like, I think what I find interesting is I kind of, again, from a theist perspective, like I kind of think that humans, we do this, right? So let's say someone has what they honestly believe is a spiritual experience, right? And so but if that person lives in India and they're a Hindu and they've been raised in a Hindu culture, then they will say, oh, this spiritual experience, well, this must have been, Ganesh or something. And therefore, this spiritual experience I had, and it felt so real. Well, it must be proof that Ganesh is real. I had a spirit experience with Ganesh. But, if I'm Muslim, I might say that was, I don't know, Allah. And if I was, some other religion, I don't know, Jain or Sikh or something, right? So in other words, we filter our experiences through our culture, and we assume that it must be, I just had an experience with my God, because there is no other, of course.
Right.
Right. And so I will go that way. I would say the other way, not that that all these gods are different gods. I would say that different people in different cultures who have spiritual experiences that they are convinced were real experiences, quite often will just assume, therefore this validates my religious assumptions.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I definitely had comparable experiences in my Christianity to experiences of me not being a Christian, and say like, wow, these are kind of the same feelings, and
yes,
I think that speaks to, I think that plays a big part in a lot of people's deconstruction stories, when they talk about their understanding of Christianity and stuff. So it's important to acknowledge, for sure. But like Christianity has, at least fundamentalist Christianity has these built-in safeguards to prevent that from happening by saying you can't go to these metal concerts. That's for Satanists. That's not for you. You can't listen to this cool music or hang out and wear these cool clothes or feel sexy or you do whatever, because you have to, there's a level of control there. So
that's right.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but Milo, I'm glad you're liking the show. I'm glad you're trying to get your name off. That's good. More power to you, and I hope you keep enjoying the episodes as they come ahead. Thanks again, Milo. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Have a good.
You too, Milo. You too. Like there's some other callers, but we just have to. Man, I think any other calls that we get to, we're gonna go over time. I'm not sure. Like,
I promise to be brief.
Okay.
I'll try to be brief. Let's
do one more. Let's do one more. Let's go to Eric calling in from Texas. Hey, Eric, you're on the line. What's up?
Hi. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to chat. So I've recently been struggling just with how much Christianity is like embroiled in our culture and our days off that we have and the words we use. I've been trying to remove like God and Jesus even from my vocabulary. Instead of saying like, oh my God, I'll say, oh my moon. So I'm just curious, like how from both of y'all's perspectives, either you deal with it or feel that it's like, is it too much? Is there anything that really we can do about it at this point? Or how does it kind of shape the way Christians also live in this country?
Keith, I'll let you go first.
Well, I'll try to be brief. Yeah, so you're right. And I think people, we don't even know how pervasive it is. Like I one time made a list of about like 10 different phrases that literally were quoted from Jesus, like don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And, all these kind of things. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Like these are all specific quotes from Jesus, and total non-Christians use these phrases all the time, not realizing they're quoting Jesus when they do that. And so do I think we're ever going to reach a place where we're absolutely living in a totally secular environment? Probably not. I don't see that happening. Unfortunately, I mean, we're just going to be, in America especially, people are convinced it's a Christian nation. It's not. But I think it's kind of here to stay, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm curious because I don't know the answer to this either, but like I see a couple different scenarios. One is that the nation, as we know it, becomes more secular, broadly so, but like I'm not convinced that it'll be atheist. I think it's going to be loosely spiritual. That's what I have my money on. Like I think out of all the possibilities, I think that's what it's going to be. But like there's this other possibility that, because I've seen statistics that say that like progressive Christianity and other kinds of Christianity aren't growing as much as we thought, but fundamentalists are not leaving in the same numbers, right? So it's almost like the Christianity that's left over might be even more fundamentalist because like the more progressive types are becoming in their dark ways, like me, following the dark path. And then, what's left over is the real Bible thumpers, down here in Texas and other places. So like, I don't know which one is more likely. I hope it's not the second. And honestly, there's problems with the first two, because like, I would like to live in a culture that is free to be skeptical of all kinds of ideas. And I think that these kind of woo new age stuff can do just as much harm in certain contexts, even though they can also be meaningful and provide something that like Christianity can do, like in a sense of community and stuff. But whatever happens, like it's not going to be the same. What we're seeing now in 2021, I think the religious perspective of this country is changing. I just don't know exactly where. So I don't know. That's my take. Any follow up on that, Eric or Keith?
Well, yeah, I would just say I'm
I probably shouldn't have asked at the same time.
Right,
I'll go with Keith first.
Again, I'll try and be brief. Like I'm typically a pessimist at heart, right? Which is an optimist with experience. But I'm fairly optimistic in the long term that this sort of fundamentalist Christian, which I find very, very hateful and toxic and very us and them, very tribalistic, which unfortunately is very embedded in American politics, right? I look at the same numbers and I see actually the church getting older, getting much older. Those people are dying out. There are not as many young people being a part of that. Now, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think you are always going to have certain little churches in the backwoods somewhere, in Kentucky or North Carolina or Tennessee or something, that they're never gonna. I mean, they're just gonna they're gonna lock themselves off from the world and just hunker down and never let go. But I kind of feel like the majority of young people, millennials, and whatever is after that, Gen Z, whatever. I think most of them seem to really reject all those ideas and are just either not interested in religion at all, or if they are, they're interested in much more of something that looks kind of like what I'm suggesting and a lot less like what their parents or grandparents are into. So I have hopes, and especially with this deconstruction movement, I have hopes that it's going to move away from that into something a little, I don't know, a little nicer.
One last thoughts from Eric. Give your take here, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I guess I look at it because I was not raised in a religious household. And then I am looking back at my life in a different type of deconstruction of my just normal everyday life and how much Christianity and God is a part of it, even though that's not something I've ever subscribed to. And I guess what I'm hoping for is something along the lines of that. You know, you're not pushed into it without even really knowing, even if you don't go to church, that you have more of an opportunity to explore and come to your own decisions. And I guess that's kind of like my hope for the future.
Yeah,
me too.
I almost wonder, like, will Easter one day become like Columbus Day is to me, like just another holiday that people don't put much stock into? I don't know. It's possible, but we're definitely not living in that time now. So we'll see what the future brings. But thanks, Eric, for calling in. Appreciate your call. And folks, we're wrapping it up here on another great episode of Truth Wanted. But don't go away just yet, because Keith is going to be with us on the after show Discord. So link to that is going to be in the description. So go check that out. But first, I have to say, Keith, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Where can people find you at?
Yeah, I'm online. Yeah, there you go. My blog, I blog on Patheos, a progressive channel, KeithGiles.com. You can find it there. My podcast is the Heretic Happy Hour. I have a brand new podcast I'm doing called Peace Catalyst Podcast that just started. And we're talking about getting Muslims and Christians together, working together side by side for making peace and reconciliation in our world. I have all my books are on Amazon and the Jesus Un series. You can just search Jesus Un or my name. You'll find those there. And by the way, all my Kindle books, my first 5 Kindle books are 99 cents for the whole month of April. So go check them out. On Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I have a YouTube channel as well. And I'm happy to connect with anybody. So
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for giving those plugs out, Keith. And of course, this is Truth Wanted. This is a show. It's live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central I said it's on Friday. I was going to say Fridays again, but it is on Fridays. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, be sure to check out the live show too, because we got a chat that goes on and it's pretty awesome. And of course, we got the after show that happens and is not recorded. So you should go check that out. But there's a couple different ways to support this show. One of them is patreon.com/truthwanted. I can't talk anymore, Keith. I'm losing it. I'm losing my edge. But other ways to do it is you can go into the chat there and click support the show there. And you get little emoticons and stuff. It's pretty cool with my face on it and the Truth Wanted logo as well. We also have merchandise. That's a bit.ly link for that in the description as well. We got shirts, hoodies, stickers, all kinds of swag. So all those are ways to support this show. And we're almost all volunteers that do it. So thank you guys for support in all the different ways that you do. You can connect with me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, or you can email the show. It's truth@atheist-community.org. And you should check out the Facebook Truth Wanted fan group. Keith, I'm losing it. I'm trying to get through it. I don't know what's happening. I'm losing it. But yeah, check it out. That Facebook group is pretty awesome where you can discuss the show. And last but never, ever, not least, I have to thank the wonderful, amazing, fantastic, stupendous crew that helps make this show happen every single week. Look at that crew cam. Look at all the crew.
Good looking guys there.
Good looking boys. The boys are helping out tonight. Thank you, boys, for all of your contributions to the show. You guys are awesome. We're going to go to the after show Discord now, but Keith, any last words of wisdom you want to say before we wrap up the show?
Oh, wow. Well, I don't know if I have any words of wisdom, but I would say, Dan, this has been a blast. I really have enjoyed it. It's been a really great conversation. I appreciate your humility, your openness, I know we don't agree, but I'm really big on this idea. We don't have to agree to treat each other with love and respect. And so thank you for modeling that. I really appreciate that. And you, by the way, also, you guys rock. I mean, you've been so great. I'm going to be eating a meal now that you guys basically provided for me. Thank you. Mwah, I love it. And hey, if more atheists fed me, maybe I'd be an atheist. I appreciate that.
Yes, for those who don't know, we do provide Grubhub for all of our guests. that come onto the show, and it's in all of our volunteers that are helping right now. So that's another way that your contributions help with that. So yes, thank you, Keith. Thank you for being on, and thank you everybody who is listening / watching the show. Remember to always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.